Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten and every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. George Orwell, 1984. Well, welcome everybody. I've just come back from Romania, having given a talk with many others, about 40 of us actually, but I was the only one on climate change, and that's in the Romanian conference room inside the Romanian Parliament there, with all Romanian MPs being invited, etc. And it was very interesting because I met a physicist who has done some work that totally agrees with the whole of my philosophy, etc. So there's some exciting stuff going to be coming out of that, I think. But I've often thought that, how do I get a message across to everybody? And let me just explain what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about getting a message across that everyone can understand while using science and evidence to provide the proof of it. The famous hockey stick that Michael Mann came up when he was an undergraduate, he hadn't got his doctorate, he was a student, we came up with in 1998, changed everything. And I've done a video on that, and the link's in the description below this one. But basically what it showed was a declining temperature over the last 1,000 years until we just passed 1900 and whack, up it went. The hockey stick. The hockey stick was based on tree rings. And tree rings are not that great actually as a proxy for temperature. So if you're looking at tree rings and how fast trees grow, there's the nutrients, there's the wetness, there's all sorts of other factors that come in besides the temperature. It's a rough indication, but it's got many problems. So I thought, well, Michael Mann did away with the Little Ice Age. That doesn't exist in the alarmist world. And the medieval warm period, and since then the Roman warm period. Because I'll tell you why they had to do away with them. Because if you've got warm periods doing this in the past, and Little Ice Ages doing this and coming out, without man interfering, and it certainly didn't interfere with the recovery from 1690 coming out of the Little Ice Age, it doesn't make sense, does it, that we can today be having another one. In other words, it could be, it's natural. It is natural, actually. So it could be that. So you can start looking at things in different ways now to prove the Little Ice Age, to prove the medieval warm period, etc. And so I'm going to do a mixture of science, and I'm going to review a lot of different papers here to try to give you a feel of it. The facts are that the medieval warm period was worldwide, absolute worldwide, as was the Little Ice Age. And they'll tell you it's just local in the north, local here. But just think about this. Instead of using tree rings, why not use the tree line? Because that is a really good measure. How far north did the tree line go in these different periods over the last few thousand years? And not just how far north, but how far up mountains, like in Switzerland, did the tree line go? Because if we could show the tree lines were further north in the medieval warm period than they are today, then we know it was warmer in the medieval warm period. But to show that, and this is going to be the first part of this video, we're going to look at tree lines right around the world. And then if you're going to do that, look at sea levels. Now sea levels also change, because as you warm you get a higher sea level basically, and the sea levels in the medieval warm period were higher than today, and I give you historic evidence for that. And a bit of scientific one, but basically I can show that it was warmer then, and that the sea levels were quite a lot higher, actually, about 8 inches higher than today. And in fact, there's like an 8-inch cycle going on. So that's another point. And then I could go into the science of plants and how they are gasping for the CO2, because they are today gasping for it. They evolved in much higher CO2 levels, and we can look back through the records to have a look at that as well. So what this video is about then is giving you overwhelming evidence that the medieval warm period existed, and with that comes the Little Ice Age. And I've done videos on this before. This is going to go into more detail, but it's simple enough for everyone to understand. And as always, I give you the references. You can check it up. I don't expect everyone to read all the scientific papers, but I've got to give those references because I'm giving evidence. So here we are. Let's now prove beyond doubt that there was a medieval warm period. It wasn't just local, and it occurred right round the world. And we're starting with tree lines. So this is an alarmist sort of graph showing the present tree line there in red and where it could move further north to as we warmed up. But of course, that's correct. There is a limit to the tree line if you stay in the Arctic, or if you like, the southern hemisphere the other way towards the Antarctic, and how far it goes depends on the sustained temperatures that are ambient at that time. So if we could find tree lines north of that, dated, say, 1,000 years ago in the medieval warm period, that would be clear evidence that there was a sustained higher temperature at that point. Well, of course, that's what we can do. But you don't have to go into nice cold areas like that to find where the tree lines were. You can also go up mountains, because the tree line of a mountain is determined yet again by the ambient temperature at that time, full stop. So the tree lines are a fantastic way of looking at how warm a climate was in the past. Now, I'm not going to draw each of these bits of evidence out. I'm going to give you the reference and we're going to highlight their conclusions. But anyone can check in depth these papers I'm giving you, this scientific research I'm giving you. So here we go. Let's start in Sweden with the tree line up mountains. This Swedish research paper, dated 2015, looks at the tree line up mountains in Sweden. And it dates them back using carbon dating, the accepted methods, to the medieval warm period. That's the paper, and here is what it has to say. Radiocarbon dated megafossil pines revealed that the tree line was consistently positioned as much as 115 metres higher during the medieval warm period than today. That's taken the AD 2000 to 2010 temperature after a century of warming and substantial tree line upshift. Drawing on the last mentioned figure and a lapse rate of 0.6 degrees centigrade per 100 metres of height, it may be inferred that the medieval summer temperatures were about 0.7 degrees C warmer than much of the past 100 years. Extensive pine mortality and tree line descent after that medieval warming peak reflects substantially depressed temperatures during the Little Ice Age. Now, that is absolute, evidence, clear evidence, based on a very good parameter, how far the trees can go up the mountain. And it shows the medieval warm period was warmer than today. So a concluding point on this paper, in perspective of the late Holocene, that's the gap since the Little Ice Age, the warm period we're in now, there is nothing particularly unnatural or unprecedented or alarming about modern warming and associated ecological changes in high mountain Fennoscandia and adjacent northern regions, and he quotes other papers. So they're not surprised. That's what you'd expect in the medieval warm period, that the alarmists say did not exist. So let's now head off to Russia and look at Asia with their tree line information or their tree ring information. Well, this is what you can draw from that investigation. It is clear from the data presented in this study that the climate episodes referred to as a medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age were indeed real and likely global phenomena, and the Earth's climate consistently fluctuates between natural warm and cold phases. Given the author's findings that the 20th century warming is not extraordinary when compared to the other warmings, the 2,200-year record, it stands to reason that the warming of the 20th century is probably nothing more than a natural recovery from the global chill of the Little Ice Age, rather than a response to the build-up of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. I thought that would wake you up. So let's go over to Switzerland and look at tree lines there, not just in the medieval warm period, but way back through the Holocene. The Holocene, which is a gap between the ice ages we're mostly in, vary between about 10 and 15,000 years. We're now 11,000 years into this one, and it was much warmer in the Holocene maximum in the past. Let's look at the tree lines. This is the graph. The vertical column is the height of the tree line up the mountains, and as you can see in the Holocene maximum here, it was high up the mountains, and then it suddenly dropped and then gradually declined until today. The tree line was always higher in the past. So let's look at a recent example of alarmism and compare what it was like, let's say, in Roman times. Well, this is a depiction of the decline of the glacier in the Swiss Alps over time, showing how glaciers have melted in this period since the Industrial Revolution. But let's go back to the Roman period and establishing where the tree line was in the same valley. Well, it's rather a pleasant picture, really, that the Romans had when they came to Britain and established all their civilization across Europe. They had an easier time, didn't they? But this is not what you're told today. Just look at this newsflash from The Guardian. Now crossing over to look at sediments in the eastern Himalayas. This study looked at the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age by using sediments of the glaciers in the eastern Himalayas, well disconnected from the sea, but actually it tallied with the information from the North Atlantic. Here's its conclusions. The climate variability reconstructed in this study clearly demonstrates close agreement between the oscillatory climatic phenomena in the past region of the North Atlantic Ocean and distant Himalayas. Our climate reconstruction captures a well-documented worldwide climate events such as the medieval warm period and Little Ice Age, as well as those of even earlier Dark Ages, cold period, and Roman warm period. Since the present climate reconstructions have been carried out at a remote location in the largest glaciated region of the eastern Himalayas, the observed warming during the late 19th century and then cooling during the early 20th century are the most likely of natural origin and not due to any anthropogenic influences. The overall assessment of quantitative climate reconstruction in the Zanu Glacier area and its temporal trends, which are comparable with regional continental hemispheric perspectives, and in a global perspective should look forward to a more comprehensive analysis with both spatial and temporal coverage. I could, of course, carry on with a lot more tree line studies around the world, but we'll swap over now. We'll swap over to sea level studies going back to the medieval warm period. Now, sea levels do vary a little bit around the world. They're not, as you would think, dead on, because, for example, the Gulf Stream flow is so enormous that it can be 5 meters high in the middle, and it is on the edges, as it were. But overall, if sea levels are rising, you'll see that rise reflected comparably right round the world. So let's look at sea level rises going back to the medieval warm period. Well, this is the paper we're going to lift a quote from. They did a major study using different proxies to try to find the sea levels right the way back from the year 200 to 2100 to now. So they've gone into future predictions, which I'm not going to go into because we're just looking at the past. So this is the takeaway from that past study. Past sea levels established by multi-proxy reconstructions, assuming that the established relationship between temperature and sea level holds from 200 to 2100 AD. So, as I said, they've gone into the future. Over the last 2,000 years, minimum sea level was minus 19 to minus 26 centimetres and occurred around 1730. Well, that's the Little Ice Age. Maximum sea level was 12 to 21 centimetres and occurred around 1150. Well, that was the medieval warm period. So we're showing sea levels varying there in the medieval warm period and, of course, reducing in the Little Ice Age. Well, just doing one more paper on sea levels, climate-related sea level variations over the past 2 millennia. Now, this paper I'm just going to take a quote from again. Sediments in Piedmont Marsh of the lower Hudson Valley show a dry medieval warm period from 800 to 1300. In the Hammock River Marsh in Connecticut, salt marshes extended 15 kilometers further westward than they do in the present due to higher sea levels. So there we are again, in a medieval warm period, higher sea levels. But let's look at some more local things to the UK. Let's look at some history.
Man of Halle, stop your dreaming. Can't you see the spear points gleaming?
I'm sorry about that. I just couldn't resist it for Harlech Castle. I'm going to quote here from the details on Harlech Castle. The sea originally came much closer to Harlech than in modern times, and a watergate and long flight of steps leads down from the castle to the former shore, which allowed the castle to be resupplied by sea during the sieges. So this is one of many castles built by Edward around Wales, actually, and there are many castles in England as well, which are near the seashore, which are now much further back, in some cases a whole mile. It's also worth watching my video 1066, a climate change lesson, and that's about a castle that is now a mile from the original sea that it used to drop traitors out of the gate into. The link is in the description below this video. And then again, going the opposite way, if you look at castles in Britain that were built later near the beach, they are still near the beach. So this one was built in 1545 and is quite near the water, not like the others in Wales which were built earlier. So the evidence in history is clear for all to see. Now I'm going to end this video with a clip from probably, must be nearly 20 years ago. But this clip is an honest scientist explaining things to Congress. It's quite short, and I think you'll find it interesting.
I am a geologist and geophysicist. I have a bachelor's degree in geology from Indiana University and a PhD in geophysics from the University of Utah. My field of specialization in geophysics is temperature and heat flow. In recent years, I have turned my studies to the history and philosophy of science. In 1995, I published a short paper in the academic journal Science. In that study, I reviewed how borehole temperature data recorded a warming of about 1 degree Celsius in North America over the last 100 to 150 years. The week the article appeared, I was contacted by a reporter for National Public Radio. He offered to interview me, but only if I would state that the warming was due to human activity. When I refused to do so, he hung up on me. I had another interesting experience around the time my paper in Science was published. I received an astonishing email from a major researcher in the area of climate change. He said, quote, "We have to get rid of the medieval warm period," unquote. The medieval warm period was a time of unusually warm weather that began around 1000 AD and persisted until a cold period known as the Little Ice Age took hold in the 14th century. Warmer climate brought a remarkable flowering of prosperity, knowledge, and art to Europe during the High Middle Ages. The existence of the medieval warm period had been recognized in the scientific literature for decades, but now it was a major embarrassment to those maintaining that the 20th century warming was truly anomalous. It had to, quote, "be gotten rid of," unquote. In 1769, Joseph Priestley warned that scientists overly attached to a favored hypothesis would not hesitate to warp the whole course of nature. In 1999, Michael Mann and his colleagues published a reconstruction of past temperature in which the medieval warm period simply vanished. This unique estimate became known as the hockey stick because of the shape of the temperature graph. Normally in science, when you have a novel result that appears to overturn previous work, you have to demonstrate why the earlier work was wrong. But the work of man and his colleagues was initially accepted uncritically, even though it contradicted the results of more than 100 previous studies. Other researchers have since reaffirmed that the medieval warm period was both warm and global in its extent. There is an overwhelming bias today in the media regarding the issue of global warming. In the past 2 years, this bias has bloomed into an irrational hysteria. Every natural disaster that occurs is now linked with global warming, no matter how tenuous or impossible the connection. As a result, the public has become vastly misinformed on this and other environmental issues. Earth's climate system is complex and poorly understood, but we do know that throughout human history, warmer temperatures have been associated with more stable climates and increased human health and prosperity. Colder temperatures have been correlated with climatic instability, famine, and increased human mortality. The amount of climatic warming that has taken place in the past 150 years is poorly constrained, and its cause, human or natural, is unknown. There is no sound scientific basis for predicting future climate change with any degree of certainty. If the climate does warm, it is likely to be beneficial to humanity rather than harmful. In my opinion, it would be foolish to establish national energy policy on the basis of misinformation and irrational hysteria. Thank you. He said, quote, "We have to get rid of the medieval warm period," unquote.
There are 787 scientists from 462 institutions in 42 countries over the last 20 years who have contributed to papers establishing that medieval warm period was real, was global, and was warmer than the present, and yet the UN says that there wasn't a medieval warm period. That is the scientific consensus, if you do science by consensus, which the UN says it does. But on the question of the medieval warm period, the UN refuses to accept the scientific consensus. Instead, it uses made-up graphs.
And by the way, another example of the cover-up is if you go to the IPCC webpage, you cannot access the first and second reports anymore. They're gone.
The fact is that we are facing a tidal wave of ignorance, a tidal wave of population control that was beyond our imagination, really. We really have to fight this. We really do. These people aren't scientists. They manipulate data. They change data. They fiddle things so it looks one way, not the other. That is not how science works.